All human beings are governed by powerful emotions that compel certain actions and behaviors. For instance, when encountering someone for whom there's a strong physical attraction, the brain essentially goes haywire. High levels of dopamine and norepinephrine produce feelings of giddiness and euphoria, as well as increased energy. However, these neurochemicals can reduce appetite and cause insomnia, sometimes resulting in lovesickness to a point where it is near impossible to eat or sleep. Sexual arousal can also inhibit the prefrontal cortex, an area of the brain that is responsible for critical thinking, self-awareness, and rational behavior. In other words, infatuation makes you dumb. You might stumble over your words or mention something inappropriate. That is, if you can think of anything at all to say. Even though there is a high probability of making a complete fool of yourself, if you can manage to keep it together long enough to make a good impression, then there's no greater feeling than being with the person of your fancy and falling head over heels. But there's a dark side, especially when yearnings are left unchecked or passions go unrestrained. Promising careers have been lost, stable homes have been broken, and bloody wars have been waged, all in the name of desire. These negative consequences were well understood by the theologians and philosophers that developed our earliest codes of conduct. Hinduism, Judaism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, Sikhism, and Baha'ism all view lust as a detestable sin. Even certain philosophers of ancient Greece warned against the dangers of eros, or carnal erotic love. Many Eastern religions take a somewhat relaxed view of lust, in that they simply admonish their followers against succumbing to its influence. In contrast, the religions stemming from the God of Abraham are particularly ruthless and cruel. All throughout history, adulterers have been persecuted and outcast, severely punished by being whipped and beaten, as well as brutally executed for their crimes of immorality. Although some Islamic countries still implement harsh penalties through Sharia law, today most Western nations do not even consider adultery to be a misdemeanor, let alone a capital offense. However, that hasn't stopped some religious leaders from stooping so low as to invoke the notion of thought crime, using fear tactics, manipulation, and coercion in order to spread their holy message. When distilled to its essence, lust shares similar qualities with many other physical desires over which we have limited control. For example, the urgent sense to flee from danger, the insatiable craving for energy-rich foods, and the overwhelming compulsion to avoid substances potentially harboring disease. Such physical desires are crucial for individual survival, yet organisms that live within interdependent social groups are also compelled to engage in a variety of behaviors that aid the survival of others. There are countless examples of people risking their own lives to save their biological children, close relatives, and even complete strangers. Although the compulsion towards altruism is strongly imprinted on the human psyche, similar altruistic instincts are displayed in a range of animal species, from single-celled microorganisms to crustaceans, insects, avians, as well as mammals. In fact, some physical desires are so strong, such as those formed through maternal bonds, that interspecies barriers seemingly fall to the wayside. The instincts, behaviors, emotions, and appearance of animals have been shaped and molded according to the ability of their predecessors to survive to reproductive age and level of fitness enabling them to secure a mate. Indeed, any characteristic found to be sexually appealing has been passed on by the reproductively successful members of every generation. Charles Darwin named this phenomenon sexual selection, where either physical or behavioral traits that serve the function of attracting the opposite sex can provide a distinct advantage and competitive edge in accomplishing the goal of passing on one's genes. It may even be the case that human intelligence itself is a product of sexual selection. Large numbers of Acheulean hand axes, the oldest of which date to 1.76 million years, have been discovered by evolutionary anthropologists across 3 different continents. It is hypothesized that Stone Age technology enabled our early ancestors to obtain sources of nutrition that they would have otherwise been unable to access, resulting in the development of larger brains and increased intelligence. However, a characteristic feature of the Acheulean hand axe is the symmetrical design, an aesthetic quality that suggests these objects were not created for purely utilitarian purposes. Furthermore, many axes show no signs of wear and tear, and others are far too cumbersome to be employed for practical uses, such as butchering meat. Therefore, large, symmetrical, or unused axes may have served as a type of ornamentation. It is believed that those individuals who were especially adept at fashioning Acheulean hand axes were placing their intelligence on display, with the aim of acquiring greater resources and prestige over their sexual rivals, increasing their chances at successful courtship, and subsequently bequeathing their intelligence and propensity for toolmaking to their offspring. Over the past 1 million years, human evolution has been influenced by a positive feedback loop of sorts, involving the development of technology, the acquisition of food, the increase in intelligence, and greater access to sexual partners. Each successive generation born of this cycle was able to improve upon existing technology and develop new methods of food acquisition, such as agriculture and animal domestication, eventually leading to the mechanization of farming and harvesting, as well as mass production and automation of food processing. These advancements in technology and the accumulation of resources have allowed humans to aggregate within vast societies. Consequently, the world we currently inhabit today is much different than the world in which our emotional drives initially evolved, even though the human brain has not significantly changed in the past 200,000 years. Hunter-gatherers belonging to the Paleolithic era were subject to extremes of scarcity. The next big meal, or the next chance to mate, was largely unknown, where access to these limited opportunities was often a matter of violent struggle and ruthless competition. In contrast, humans belonging to the modern era are subject to extremes of abundance. With a plethora of options for food delivery services, as well as limitless amounts of internet pornography, our appetites can be immediately satiated with a mere tap of a screen. Our struggle is the polar opposite to that of our ancestors. As a result, addiction and disease are the inevitable outcome of the brain's inability to cope with the overabundance afforded to us by technology. Theologians of the past were right to warn us against the dangers of lust, gluttony, and other such vices that play on our base desires. But perhaps they were right for the wrong reasons. Anything that excites the brain's dopamine reward pathway runs the risk of becoming addictive. And the more recent advancements in technology have produced an array of new age vices that our predecessors could have never anticipated. Any action or behavior will result in a negative consequence when taken to an extreme. But that does not mean all actions and behaviors are inherently dangerous or immoral. Ultimately, it is up to each individual to determine how best to live their own life, where a scientific approach to understanding the desires that govern human behavior, in relation to both virtues and vices, can enable us to better understand addiction, how best to guide our actions, and avoid the pitfalls that arise from indulging in excess. Previously in this series, we examined the Old Testament, where immoral behavior is punished as a capital offense, such as burning to death the daughter of a priest who loses her honor by fornicating, and the stoning of an unmarried woman that has lost her virginity. Even to this day, some Islamic countries still implement the death penalty for sexual promiscuity by stoning men and women for the crime of adultery. Sharia law dictates that if a man gets divorced or becomes a widower, then his punishment for having sex outside of marriage, also known as adultery, is far more severe than a man who has never been married, where the previously married man must be stoned to death.
A man who has never ever got married in his life, yet he is an international playboy. He fornicates with all women he meets. If he's caught red-handed, what to do? The answer is flog him 100 lashes. Okay. What about if a person married a woman and he stayed with her only for one night, consummated the marriage, and then she died, or she sought divorce and they got separated? The man stayed 10 years without any sexual interaction, and then he fell into sin and had intercourse with a woman and was caught red-handed or confessed. What should we do with him? Stone him to death. Some scholars say that the difference is that a person who was not married, all of his sexual encounters did not fulfill the emptiness in his soul, and it was all relationships that had no legitimacy. While a person who got married in a halal way and had intercourse with his halal wife, he tasted the meaning of marriage, and hence opting for haram like the one he did is a major sin that can only be cleansed by execution. This may sound logical, and it may not. Either way, this is the Sharia law that has to be followed.
Today, Brunei's ruler, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah, completed a change to the country's laws. He's made adultery and sex between two men punishable by death.
This is floggings, this is whippings, and in the case of adultery, stoning people to death.
Human rights observers say while other countries practice various forms of Sharia law, Brunei's punishments are now among the most severe.
What's more, many people belonging to Islamic nations are imposed with tight behavioral restrictions, such as the prevention of unmarried men and women from appearing together in public, hand-holding, and the adherence to a strict dress code, measures put in place to prevent what is deemed to be inappropriate interactions between the sexes.
Here are some of the rules in the Islamic Republic regarding women. Women must cover all parts of their bodies, including their hair, except for the face and hands, with loose-fitting garments. Women must not wear any makeup in government offices or state-run television. Unrelated men and women are not allowed to socialize. The punishments for violating social vice rules vary from reprimands to execution by stoning.
In contrast, the Baha'i faith is much more tolerant when it comes to accepting the various cultural norms of its followers from around the world. Estimated to have over 5 million adherents, the religion was established in the 19th century by the Iranian prophet Baha'u'llah as the newest entry into the Abrahamic tradition. A unique aspect of the faith is that Baha'is believe every religion has the same spiritual foundation, and all human beings are different but equal. Despite the progressive views on gender equality, the religion teaches The Baha'i conception of sex is based on the belief that chastity should be strictly practiced by both sexes, not only because it is in itself highly commendable ethically, but also due to its being the only way to a happy and successful marital life. Sexual relationships of any form outside of marriage are not permissible therefore, and whoso violates this rule will not only be responsible to God, but will incur the necessary punishment from society. In paragraph 49 of the Kutub-e-Aqdas, which is the Baha'i holy text, it states, God hath imposed a fine on every adulterer and adulteress to be paid to the house of justice. In a letter to the National Spiritual Assembly of the United States, the Universal House of Justice proclaimed that unmarried men and women must not even hug or kiss. The letter states, the Pilgrim's Note reports the Master as saying, women and men must not embrace each other when not married or not about to be married. They must not kiss each other. If they wish to greet each other or comfort each other, they may take each other by the hand. The Master's words can certainly be taken as the true spirit of the teachings on the subject of sex. We must strive to achieve this exalted standard. Hinduism is widely considered to be the oldest religion in the world that is still in active practice today, where roots and customs date back more than 4,000 years. With approximately 1.6 billion followers, most of whom live in India, Hinduism is the third largest world religion, trailing Islam with 1.9 billion followers and Christianity with 2.3 billion. However, Hinduism is unique in that it is not a single religion, but rather a compilation of many different philosophies and traditions. According to the Dharma Shastras, which are ancient law books that prescribe moral regulations and righteous conduct, if one pursues sex purely for pleasure or selfish enjoyment, then it is considered evil and unlawful. However, if sex is pursued for procreation, as part of one's matrimonial responsibilities, then it is considered dutiful, lawful, and moral. In essence, sexual reproduction is for the purpose of creating a family, and this sacred act must only be conducted within the purview of marriage. It should be noted that throughout the history of Hinduism, the perception of what was sexually permissible has varied based on certain time periods or the different cultures in which the tradition was practiced. In particular, the Kama Sutra is an ancient Sanskrit text dating to approximately 400 BCE that promotes sexuality, eroticism, and emotional fulfillment as one of the proper goals of life. Its chapters discuss methods of courtship, flirting, sexual positions, maintaining power in a marriage, when and how to commit adultery, as well as many other topics. However, in most modern-day Punjabi cultures, which encompass the followers of Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, and Sikhism, family honor is held in high esteem. To even suggest that a young woman has had a relationship with a man before marriage can result in disgrace for her parents as well as her siblings.
In this music video produced in British Columbia, a wrathful father, disgraced by a daughter's romance, orders the sons to avenge the family honor.
We, Indo-Canadian people, attach our honor to the social activity of the sister or a daughter. When they do something which we consider traditionally inappropriate, then we feel dishonored. Ready, Punjab?
This idea of honor has nothing to do with the Sikh religion, according to Harjinder Thind. He hosts a popular Punjabi radio talk show. He says honor is rooted in the culture.
Our honor is very dear to us. Ankh, izzat we call it. So we attach that ankh or izzat with our daughters and sisters.
Is the honor more important than the life of a child?
In some cases, a group of people think, yes.
Originating in Punjab, India, Sikhism was developed in the 15th century by Guru Nanak, whose teachings are said to be revelations from the God of monotheism, not a social protest movement, nor an attempt to reconcile the polytheistic traditions of Hinduism with that of Islam, the other monotheistic religion that predominated the region at the time. Not only is Sikhism relatively young, it is the 5th largest organized religion with approximately 25 to 30 million followers. A central tenet of the Sikh faith concerns the 5 virtues, which are the fundamental qualities one must cultivate in order to reunite or merge with God. These virtues are charity, contentment, compassion, humility, and love. In opposition to the 5 virtues are the 5 thieves, or the 5 major weaknesses of the human condition that are at odds with our spiritual essence. The first thief is lust or desire, which subsequently leads to anger, then greed, attachment, and finally ego or excessive pride.
At the very beginning, when you have this emptiness, it starts with one feeling, and that feeling is called desire. I need to get something. I need something in my life. Guru Ji says the first feeling is called kaam. I need something. When you don't get it, what do you feel? You feel frustrated. It's not coming. I need to get it. You start developing a second emotion from the first emotion, that of internal agitation, frustration, anger, growth, the second emotion. And if that anger continues, if that frustration continues, it's no longer just a desire, now it's something that I must have. Greed. And then what happens when you get it? This is mine. More attachment. We spend all of our time in this greed cycle, going from one thing to another, and we've been doing this from the day that we were born, and then all of a sudden we ask ourselves this question, who am I? I need to go on a spiritual quest. I don't know where my egos come from. Where did my ego come from? But we don't understand. This whole process has been part of you developing your ego. And Guru uses a very specific word for these emotions. He doesn't say you just have 5 emotions. He says you have 5 thieves. A thief is something that is outside of you. It doesn't belong with you. The second thing is, in order for it to be a thief, it's stealing something from you. Thieves are stealing an amrit inside you, and it means that there is a divine essence inside every single one of us.
Buddhism was established in the 5th century BCE, and it is currently the 4th largest world religion with approximately 500 million followers. The 5 precepts is considered to be the most important code of ethics under Buddhism, where the 3rd precept requires abstinence from sensuous misconduct. Although this wording is somewhat vague, scholars widely agree that it includes adultery, fornication, rape, incest, prostitution, sex with a minor, and in modern-day teachings, masturbation is often included as well. Another important doctrine is the 10 fetters, which not only admonishes against sensual desire, but also lust for both material and immaterial existence. The Noble Eightfold Path is the proposed means by which to escape the painful cycle of reincarnation, also known as samsara. As the name suggests, there are 8 important factors to which Buddhists must adhere, with the ultimate goal of reaching enlightenment or nirvana. Buddhist teachings strongly encourage long-term, committed relationships. Men and women are permitted to have sexual intercourse within the confines of an ordained marriage for the purpose of creating a family. However, the Buddha warns that craving sexual pleasure is the cause of suffering. In the Sutta Nipata it states, "If one, longing for sensual pleasure, achieves it, yes, he's enraptured at heart. The mortal gets what he wants. But if for that person, longing, desiring, the pleasures diminish, he's shattered as if shot with an arrow." The Buddha goes on to say, "So one, always mindful, should avoid sensual desires. Letting them go, he will cross over the flood like one who, having bailed out of a boat, has reached the far shore. Reference to the flood is in regard to human suffering, and the far shore represents nirvana, a state in which there is no sensual desire. The Buddha advises laypeople that, at a minimum, sexual misconduct and the craving of pleasure ought to be avoided. However, full-time disciples, such as anointed monks and nuns, are expected to remain celibate for the entirety of their lives and abstain from all forms of sexual activity. The Buddha said, "A wise man should avoid unchastity as if it were a pit of burning cinders. One who is not able to live in a state of celibacy should at least not break the purity of another man's wife." Unsurprisingly, Christianity also takes a firm stance against lust, where the biblical authors provide numerous warnings throughout a majority of the 27 books belonging to New Testament canon. Much like Sikhism and Buddhism, Christianity has its own set of heavenly virtues and cardinal vices, although neither the Old or New Testament directly mentions these lists. In fact, the 7 deadly sins has its origins in pre-Christian Greek philosophies, such as Aristotelian ethics. Aristotle does not view ethical conduct as a rigid system of right and wrong, but rather a spectrum of human behavior. Aristotle believes that we can define a virtue as something that is destroyed by a deficiency or an excess. For example, in Book 2 of his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle explores the virtue of bravery. Someone that has a deficiency in courage, who is afraid of everything, is deemed to be a coward, whereas someone that has an excess of courage, who runs headlong into danger without even thinking, is deemed to be rash or reckless. Aristotle argues that true bravery is found between the extremes of cowardice and recklessness. Such is the case for every virtue, which represents the golden mean or the ideal average that is bordered on either side by a vice. Evagrius of Ponticus, a 4th century Christian monk, expanded upon the Aristotelian vices by listing 487 temptations and categorizing them into 8 evil thoughts. Evagrius's pupil, John Cassian, translated the thoughts from Greek to Latin. Then, in 590, Pope Gregory I revised the list, replacing sadness and vainglory with envy, thus arriving at the 7 deadly sins that we know today. During the Renaissance, the concept of the 7 deadly sins played a central role in the Divine Comedy, completed by Dante Alighieri in 1320, 1 year before his death. The narrative poem is divided into 3 parts: the Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. During Dante's journey through the afterlife, he first enters the Inferno, envisioned as a great pit composed of concentric rings that delve deep into the earth's core. Dante must pass through all 9 circles of hell, each of which house a different type of sinner, some of whom are guilty of the 7 deadly sins. The first circle of hell is Limbo, a wooded area that is inhabited by unbaptized and virtuous pagans. With the assistance of Virgil, a fellow poet and guide, Dante encounters numerous Greek and Roman figures throughout history, such as Homer, Julius Caesar, Euclid, Ptolemy, Hippocrates, Plato, and Socrates, to name a few. Upon exiting Limbo, Dante and Virgil enter the second circle of hell, reserved for those who succumb to lust and allow their appetites to sway reason. Dante first notices the lamentations, shrieks, and moans, which he describes as sounding like ocean waves crashing against the shore. He sees a circling mass of souls being battered about in all directions by the perpetual winds of an infernal hurricane. Dante compares the movement of the souls to the murmuration of starlings. This imagery symbolizes the power of lust to direct sinners in the aimless pursuit of desire. Within the violent storm, Dante recognizes such historical and mythological figures as Cleopatra, Helen of Troy, and the great Achilles. Because lust involves mutual indulgence and is not entirely self-centered, Dante considers it to be the least heinous of the sins. Therefore, the punishment for lust is far less severe than the tortures found in the lower circles of hell. While the Inferno mentions some of the deadly sins, the second part, Purgatorio, is based entirely around them. According to Catholic belief, purgatory is where Christian souls must be cleansed before advancing to heaven. In the Divine Comedy, Dante purifies himself by climbing a great mountain composed of 7 terraces, each corresponding to one of the deadly sins, with the Garden of Eden at the summit. The 7th and final terrace belongs to lust, where Dante must pass through a wall of flame. When he completes all 7 challenges and is purged of sin, Dante is permitted to enter the Garden of Eden and is greeted by his new guide, Beatrice. The journey then continues on to Paradiso, where Dante eventually comes face to face with the Holy Trinity. Although Dante's epic poem is a work of fiction, for many theologians living during the Renaissance and beyond, the 7 deadly sins were much more than just a list of vices that ought to be avoided. In particular, Peter Binsfeld, a German bishop and staunch anti-Protestant, achieved notoriety as one of the main proponents of the Trier witch trials that took place from 1581 to 1593. His treatise, titled Of Confessions of Warlocks and Witches, discusses statements by the accused that were given while being horrendously tortured, confessions that Binsfeld claims should still be trusted despite the manner in which they were obtained.
Although the Inquisition had tried witches across Europe during the 14th and 15th centuries, the mania for hunting them down didn't really gather pace until the 1600s. To modern eyes, it was an extraordinary business that had very little to do with justice or legality.
The whole witch-finding era was nonsensical. Was crazy. All it was, you know, you wanted the cottage that the old lady still lived in. You owed the baker some money. You didn't like the old woman that lived down the road. You wanted to get rid of your wife. You wanted to get rid of your girlfriend. You wanted to get rid of your husband. And so you would make up some nonsensical stories that they would creep out in the middle of the night, and down at the bottom of the garden would be a hare that suddenly turned into a demonical figure and had sex with them at the bottom of the garden. All manner of absolute nonsense that went on in those days.
In 1589, amidst the hysteria of the witch hunts, Binsfeld published another influential treatise on the 7 deadly sins, as personified in the 7 princes of hell, which include Lucifer, Leviathan, Satan, Belphegor, Mammon, Beelzebub, and Asmodeus. Some of the demons that Binsfeld ascribes to the deadly sins are more recognizable than others. However, each of them have a long and storied history in the Abrahamic traditions. The Kabbalah, which is an esoteric school of thought belonging to Jewish mysticism, describes one of several possible origins of the Prince of Lust. One night, as King David sleeps, his dreams are infiltrated by a succubus who seduces David into sexual congress. This union between demon and human results in a Cambian offspring known by several names, such as Ashmedai, Asmodai, or Asmodeus. He is commonly depicted as having the features of both human and animal, often with 3 heads, 2 of which belong to a bull and a goat. In latter Christian thought, the Prince of Lust and Lechery is imagined as taking on the vestige of a handsome young man, with good manners and a charming personality, who uses his demonic powers to seduce everyone from commoners to royalty. Asmodeus makes several appearances throughout Judeo-Islamic lore, where he is at great odds with King Solomon, the son of King David. Solomon is given a magical signet ring by the archangel Michael, which Solomon uses to entrap Beelzebub as well as several other demons. Among them is Asmodeus, who upon their first meeting, Solomon questions his name and true purpose. The demon responds, "I am called Asmodeus among mortals, and my business is to plot against the newly wedded, so that they may never know one another. And I sever them utterly by many calamities, and I waste away the beauty of virgins and estrange their hearts." Asmodeus goes on to say, "I transport men into fits of madness and desire when they have wives of their own, so that they leave them and go off by day and night to others that belong to other men, with the result that they commit sin and fall into murderous deeds." The Talmud states that Solomon captures Asmodeus in order to force him to assist with constructing the Temple of Jerusalem. After the temple's completion, Asmodeus is eager to escape bondage, and through a series of deceptions, he convinces Solomon to take off his ring of power. Asmodeus, who has shape-shifting abilities, steals the ring, assumes Solomon's identity, and usurps the throne. Solomon himself is rendered unrecognizable and forced into exile. During the impostor's reign, Asmodeus goes to work seducing Solomon's 700 wives and 300 concubines, causing all manner of mischief. Solomon eventually returns to Jerusalem from exile, and his persistent claims of being the true king spark an investigation. The council meets to conduct interviews with members of the royal court. Upon being questioned, the wives and concubines reveal that Solomon only attempts to have sex while they are menstruating. Furthermore, Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, claims the king has been attempting to have intercourse with her as well. When Asmodeus' deception is revealed, the demon flees, abandoning the ring. Finally, the true king is able to regain his throne. However, the Islamic traditions conclude the story of King Solomon much differently. In Arabic, Asmodeus is known as Rock or Stony One, and he is considered to be king of the jinn. After assuming Solomon's identity and usurping the throne, Asmodeus throws the ring of power into the sea, where it is eventually swallowed by a fish. After 40 days in exile, a fully repentant Solomon miraculously acquires the fish, and upon gutting it, discovers his magic ring. Solomon triumphantly returns to his kingdom, using the ring to imprison the jinn within a rock, which is then thrown into the sea. The idea of a genie that is held captive in a bottle and released by fishermen likely has its origin in the legend of King Solomon. As the personification of lust, Asmodeus permeated Christian demonology as the malevolent force responsible for driving sinners to commit crimes of lechery. During the Middle Ages, celibacy and virginity were glorified as the highest forms of Christian virtue. Thomas Aquinas believed that lust undermined reason and led to moral corruption. Nicholas of Lyra, in addition to many other theologians, viewed the pleasure derived from intercourse to be a sin, which resulted in shame, guilt, and even depression. It is no surprise that during this time period, the penalties for lechery were extremely severe. Due to the violation of marriage vows, adulterous offenders were typically punished more harshly than those who simply engaged in fornication. However, it was common for female adulterers to be disproportionately punished in comparison to their male counterparts. On this topic, both Pope Innocent IV and Thomas Aquinas shared a similar view. A woman's adultery was a far greater infraction because a man bore a resemblance to Jesus, while a woman more resembled the church, which could only have one spouse, Christ. Guilty women were often expelled from their homes, their hair cut or heads shaved, and forced to parade through the streets, with the aim of maximizing their public humiliation. Women were also publicly whipped or flogged, permanently mutilated by having their nose or ears cut off, as well as sentenced to death for their crimes of sexual impropriety. Such fervor over lust and adultery can be traced back to the first book of the New Testament, which has essentially instituted thought crime over the past 2 millennia up to present date.
Now, most of us can say that we're doing pretty well with that one. Most of us can say, well, I'm not married, so my sex outside of marriage technically is not adultery. And some can say, well, I've never cheated on my wife, so I'm okay. But Jesus took it a step further and explained the details of that commandment.
But Jesus said God requires truth in the inward parts. And I remember the night of my conversion, April 1972, reading the words of Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus opened up the spiritual nature of the law. And this is what he said: "You've heard it said by them of old, you shall not commit adultery." And I remember thinking to myself, well, that's sweet, I haven't committed adultery, and if there's a heaven, I'll probably get there. But then I read these words: "But I say to you, whoever looks upon a woman to lust after her has committed adultery already with her in his heart." And it was like an arrow pierced my heart. I suddenly realized I was guilty of that 100,000 times over. I was like every other red-blooded guy. I lived for lust. I gained great pleasure from lust. But once I understood that God saw my thought life, I suddenly saw my guilt, and I realized I'd be guilty on the day of judgment and wouldn't make it to heaven.
The importance of Matthew 5, verses 27 through 28 cannot be understated. Therefore, it would be prudent to examine the etymology of lust and how this word has been historically used. The oldest known Gospel of Matthew was written in Greek, dating to around the 2nd or 3rd century, and this is how Jesus' statement regarding lust originally appeared. The Greek word epithumio, or in its unmodified form epithumos, contains the prefix epi, which means to, upon, or over, and the root thumos, which does not have an exact translation in the English language and refers to a complex notion of spiritedness. Within the context of ancient Greek society, thumos signifies an emotional element of virtue by which is conveyed the righteous anger, fear, or grief of any individual that is faced with an insufferable atrocity. Thumos is the will to fight and the desire to rebel against injustice. It is the driving force that makes one stand up and declare, "I will not be silenced." Although thumos is often generalized as being the essence of manliness, it is part of every person's soul and has no gender preference. The first recorded use of thumos can be found in the Iliad, written by Homer in the 8th century BCE. In fact, thumos is collectively mentioned over 700 times in both the Iliad and the Odyssey. The legends of ancient Greece consider thumos to be an aspect of the soul that allows a hero to march bravely into battle and raise a sword against a formidable enemy. Achilles draws upon his thumos when manifesting his pain, rage, and violent retaliation over the course of his epic tale. The same anguish and fury of Achilles is mirrored in the stories of other Greek heroes, such as the Athenian tragedy of Oedipus Rex, which was first performed in 429 BCE. In a fit of despair upon learning of his patricide and incest, King Oedipus gouges out his own eyes with pins from his mother's dressing gown.
And that triple junction under the trees, that overgrown place where three roads meet, do the trees still remember? And the shaded pathways, what happened there? Whose blood was spilt? My father's, my own. On the way to Thebes I was that day, and what acts I did when I got there on the dead man's wife, entering so joyfully the same passage that gave me exit into the world.
Unlike the violent, self-destructive thumos of the Homeric epics and other Greek tragedies, Plato believes that a tempered use of thumos can guide an individual along the path to virtue, wisdom, and truth. In 370 BCE, Plato authored the Dialogue of Phaedrus, which contains the famous chariot allegory. Plato likens the three aspects of the human soul to that of a chariot being pulled by two winged horses, one white and the other black. The charioteer represents nous, which is intellect, reason, or the logical part of the soul located in the mind that must guide itself toward enlightenment. The white horse represents thumos, the noble aspect of the soul located in the heart, which imparts the moral impulses of courage and bravery in virtuous pursuit of honor and glory. The black horse represents Eros, or epithumos, the ignoble aspect of the soul, located in the stomach, that drives appetite or physical desire, both for the natural, such as food, drink, and sex, as well as the unnatural, such as money and power. The charioteer is responsible for directing the chariot, or the soul, preventing the horses from going in different directions. Ideally, the black and white horses will propel the soul forward, while reason will ensure that neither steed runs toward destruction. For Plato, the concepts of thumos and epithumos were diametrically opposed. When the book of Matthew was translated from Greek to English, epithumio was assigned the physical desire known as lust, a word that is thought to originate from much older derivatives belonging to Old Norse and Proto-Germanic. In the common vernacular, there is a tendency to associate the concept of lust with inappropriate sexual appetites and other nefarious cravings, such as a peeping Tom lusting after a woman as an object of desire, someone on a strict diet lusting after sweet and fattening treats, a corrupt politician lusting for money and power, or a soldier caught up in the heat of battle succumbing to bloodlust. However, the negative implications associated with lust are not always present within the Germanic family of languages, to which English belongs. Within these languages, lust is often paired with other terms in order to form compound words that bear no moral significance. For example, lust can be used at the beginning of a word, such as the German Lustgarten and the Dutch Blusgaard, which means pleasure garden. Historically, pleasure gardens refer to a private flower or shrub garden, as well as a formal wooded area with well-manicured walking paths and ornamental plants. Lust gardens are in contrast to sprawling lawns, public parks, or kitchen gardens used for growing food. Most modern-day gardens would have been considered lust gardens, especially in the 17th and 18th centuries. Similarly, the Swedish word lustgard translates to the Garden of Eden, as described in the Bible. Also in Swedish, the word lustgas refers to nitric oxide or laughing gas, and lustigkurre is a joker or humorous person. In addition, lust can be used at the end of a word, such as the German Hühnenlust, which refers to the delight that one can feel at seeing ruins. When viewing collapsed palaces and the rubble of temples, anxieties about the present are put into perspective, inducing a pleasing melancholy at the passage of all things. Wanderlust was first coined in 1902, originating from the German words that mean to hike and desire, which literally translates as enjoyment of hiking. Wanderlust has also been used to characterize an intense urge for self-development by experiencing the unknown, confronting unforeseen challenges, becoming better acquainted with unfamiliar cultures, or even the desire to escape and leave behind depressive feelings of guilt, as described in 1946 by Dr. Otto Fenichel in his book The Psychoanalytic Theory of Neurosis. Over the years, the term wanderlust has made its way into popular culture, even being used as the title of the 2012 comedy starring Paul Rudd and Jennifer Aniston. It is clear that in the Germanic languages, the use of lust does not necessarily have a negative connotation, nor does it refer to sexual depravity, and English is no exception. In 1651, English philosopher Thomas Hobbes wrote in his seminal work Leviathan that curiosity is the lust of the mind. Indeed, some of the greatest minds throughout history have viewed the attainment of knowledge with a certain level of longing and desire that can only be described as lust. In 1760, Anglo-Irish novelist Lawrence Sterne wrote, "The desire of knowledge, like the thirst of riches, increases ever with the acquisition of it." German philosopher Immanuel Kant once wrote, "I am an investigator by inclination. I feel a great thirst for knowledge and an impatient eagerness to advance, also satisfaction at each progressive step." In 1920, German physicist Albert Einstein stated, It is my inner conviction that the development of science seeks in the main to satisfy the longing for pure knowledge. In 1934, American author Irving Stone wrote a biographical novel about Vincent van Gogh titled Lust for Life. And in 1956, Kirk Douglas starred in the film adaptation.
Few people know the real story of this intense, strong-willed man. Now his tumultuous career is revealed for the first time with frankness and intimacy, with all that lust for life which drove him to the extremes of passion.
This movie went on to inspire the title for Iggy Pop's 1977 album, whose titular song has been featured in everything from movies, such as 1996's Trainspotting and 2003's Rugrats Go Wild, to Royal Caribbean commercials throughout the 2000s. It is evident that the use of the word lust and the implications of desire are not always negative or sexual in nature. Even the Greek manuscripts of the New Testament recognize this fact, as there are several instances where variations of the word epithumos actually have positive connotations, such as Matthew 13:17, Luke 16:21, Luke 17:22, as well as Luke 22:15. Which contains the most telling example. The verse states, "And he, Jesus, said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." The word for eagerly desired is the Greek epithumia, and this very same term appears in several other passages throughout the New Testament, where it is translated as lust. There is an obvious distinction between the different ways epithumos is referenced throughout the New Testament. In Luke 22:15, Jesus clearly does not mean to imply that his eager desire to eat the Last Supper and share the Eucharist with his disciples is inappropriate or has sexual implications. Despite the semantics of how epithumos or lust might be used, these words refer to a desire that is no different to any other physical desire necessary for the survival of individuals and the social group as a whole. In fact, it could even be argued that without such strong, inborn emotional desires, humankind would lack our most basic instincts. The innate sense to avoid dangerous animals or harmful situations, the preference or disdain for a particular food or scent, the altruistic sacrifice of oneself in order to save the life of another person, our maternal and paternal bonds, as well as the empathy felt for the misfortunes of others, are all forms of instinct that are rooted in a hardwired emotional drive over which we often can exert little to no self-control. Although desire can be seen to promote a variety of complex behavior, no better is this concept exemplified than in the instinctual drive to copulate. Without sexual lust, we might not reproduce so frequently or with such ease. It is for this reason that sex and masturbation are so pleasurable. If sex were uncomfortable or even painful, then there would be far less motivation to pass on our genes, and thus the very extinction of our species would be at risk. In this way, sexual desire is crucial for survival, for not only is it the driving force behind our existence, it may be the very key to understanding the evolution of human intelligence itself.